prosecutors in Romania have extended the detention period for the social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan.
They've had this investigation going since April. We're now February, and there are not even charges filed against them. So we think it's now crossed over to the point where it's violating international human rights.
You know I'm innocent. There's not much justice in Romania.
Andrew Tate, one of the most influential online figures in the world, says there's no justice in Romania. He and his brother Tristan have been held in jail without charge for over a month now, which would be almost impossible in, say, the UK or the United States, where the brothers are from. While many people will say, good, this is exactly what they deserve, the two British Americans are presumed innocent until proven guilty. And so on today's programme, we'll be looking at Romania's justice system and asking some prominent lawyers if they're being treated fairly. But first, let's look at the allegations against them and how the Tates are trying to defend themselves.
Remember, all I am offering is the truth, nothing more.
Andrew Tate was at the height of his fame and influence just before he was arrested in December. He had a massive following on Twitter. He was the 8th most Googled person of 2022. And every conservative broadcaster wanted a piece of him.
Hey, Andrew Tate.
He's Andrew Tate.
So Andrew Tate, great to have you here.
But since his arrest about 6 weeks ago, he's been reduced to hurriedly shouting out short statements to reporters as he's bundled in and out of police vans.
There's not much justice in Romania.
Yeah, the Nexus is trying to frame me, but God knows the truth.
Please.
There's no evidence in my files. I've done nothing wrong.
Ask them for evidence, and they will give you none, because it doesn't exist. You'll find out the truth of this case soon.
The truth of the case, though, depends on who you ask. On one hand, you have the Tate brothers who insist they're being framed by the system or the Matrix. On the other, you have Romanian prosecutors who allege that the Tates and two female accomplices have been forcing women to work for their webcam pornography business. Prosecutors say 6 women claim to be victims, but curiously, 2 of them have appeared on Romanian TV stations to say the Tates are innocent.
Are you Tate's property?
I'm no one's property.
Poți să mă treci pe mine ca și victimă dacă eu n-am spus că sunt o victimă.
The Bucharest Court of Appeal dismissed their statements, deeming the women to have been brainwashed by the Tates, and subsequently ruled for a second time to extend the brothers' detention by 30 days, this time to February the 27th. The other 4 alleged victims remain anonymous. One, a Moldovan woman, alleges that Andrew Tate raped her while luring her into working for him. One of Tate's lawyers, Eugen Vidiniak, acknowledges that Tate had sex with her, but insists it was consensual, and accused her of fabricating the rape claim. In an interview with the Nexus, he told me the women were always free to leave.
The girls were alone in the house, that they demand food at that address. They were ordering food, they were visiting the town, the mall, they were making shopping together.
Another alleged victim is the American woman whose allegations triggered this whole investigation. She claimed back in April that she was being held against her will at Tate's residence. Investigators raided Tate's property but found insufficient evidence to take further action. But they've been investigating the Tates ever since, and the brothers' new lawyer, an American big shot called Tina Glandian, says after 10 months, enough is enough.
They had the initial search in April, and it's February. It's been 10 months and no charges have been filed whatsoever.
Glandian is used to representing high-profile clients including Mike Tyson, Jussie Smollett, and even Michael Jackson. And her strategy is to show Romania is abusing her clients' human rights.
We think it's now crossed over to the point where it's violating international human rights law, because the deprivation of your liberty pre-trial is the most severe form of punishment a state can impose.
Prosecutors and human trafficking experts say there is plenty of evidence online that Andrew Tate duped women. Duped them into working for him by promising them a relationship, a human trafficking tactic known as the lover boy method. They point to these now deleted web pages on Tate's website, which offered a $400 course teaching every step to building a girl who is submissive, loyal, and in love with you. He goes on to say, that is my skill, to extremely efficiently get women in love with me.
I'm all over the place. So I end up with all these chicks just stuck in their house, sitting there, bored, completely in love with me. And of course, they don't go out. They're not allowed out. No. You stay in the house. You don't go nowhere.
Tate's lawyers say he's just playing a character online to attract clients and make money.
Are you talking about the real Andrew Tate on those videos, or are you talking about a character?
How much of Tate's online presence is real and how much is a character is debatable. But one thing he does seem genuinely worried about is being killed in jail. The suspicious deaths of John McAfee and Jeffrey Epstein in prison may have something to do with it. While being held in a Spanish jail, McAfee tweeted, "All is well. Know that if I hang myself, a la Epstein, it'll be no fault of mine." Around 8 months later, he was found hanging dead in his cell. "I'd never kill myself" was recently tweeted from Tate's account, reiterating what he's been saying for some time.
I understand that you get 3 strikes in this game. Strike 1 is they try and shut you up and discredit you, which I've just been through. Strike 2 is they try and put you in jail for no reason. And strike 3 is they kill you.
We're about to bring in our guest now, but first let's look at the reasoning prosecutors have given for detaining the Tates since the 29th of December. They suspect them of human trafficking and creating an organised crime group, but still have not charged them. One of the 4, Andrew Tate, is also suspected of rape. They deny all the allegations. The prosecutors who are preparing the charges are known as DCOT, the Directorate for Investigating Organised Crime and Terrorism. Our source close to DCOT says it's quite likely that money laundering will be added to the list of allegations. Well, let's bring in our guest now. And joining me today are Toby Cadman, an international human rights lawyer, Bruce Rivers, a criminal defense lawyer, joining us from Minneapolis. And finally, we have the human rights trafficking expert, Sylvia Tabuska, who is in Bucharest. Welcome to all 3 of you. Toby Cadman, I'd like to start with you. You know, you're used to representing people and protecting their human rights. In this case, if you were Andrew Tate's lawyer, would you be outraged by the fact that they've been kept behind bars for, 5-6 weeks now without charges?
Thank you. Well, I think in a case such as this, it's very, very important that the procedure is strictly adhered to and that the process is above all fair. When you have a concept such as preventative detention, which is not a concept that we recognise in our jurisdiction in England and Wales, where we have very strict custody time limits pre-charge, but it is something that is certainly in Romania, in a number of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in some international tribunals as well. So, of course, I would imagine the lawyers, as we are hearing, are up in arms, claiming that this is an unreasonable length of time to be held without being charged. And so I would expect them to continue to make those arguments. Of course, this is a very complicated case. We know that it has been investigated for a considerable time already. But I do think that it does undermine the legitimacy of the process when there is such delay before charging. We would certainly hope that, based on the evidence that the prosecutors say they have, there is a sufficient basis to charge all 4 defendants and to move forward with the trial. That's in the interests of the defendants. That's also in the interest of the victims. And
just briefly, in the United Kingdom, if people are being held here, what is the maximum you can hold a suspect without charging them?
Well, certainly what would ordinarily happen is being held initially for 24 hours up to, and it's generally recognized not just in our jurisdiction, but in many jurisdictions, that 72 hours is the maximum period that you can hold anybody without charge or until you charge. And so that's generally the practice that we have, depending, of course, upon the nature of the case, the seriousness, the allegations, and the strength of the evidence. The decision will be made to charge or release on bail. But certainly the custody time limits are very, very short in the United Kingdom, even for organised crime and terrorism cases.
Tina Glandian, the Tate's lawyer, says that it's quite likely that Romania is breaching their international human rights. Can any pressure be brought to bear in that regard?
Well, certainly, if the lawyer acting for the defendants is alleging that this is in breach of Article 5.3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, it may also be an argument they can raise under the constitutional protections in Romania But certainly it is a matter. Romania is a member of the Council of Europe. It's a signatory to the European Court of Human Rights, and so of course there is recourse through that process. But certainly, as the European Convention is incorporated into domestic law, they can certainly raise those arguments before the domestic courts. And of course, if there is strength in those arguments, they will have to consider whether there is a breach of Article 5 this period of time.
Bruce Rivers, I appreciate you're not a fan of the Tate brothers, but you're also not a fan of this preventative detention.
Oh, well, to say I'm not a fan of theirs, I mean, that has no bearing on the rights that I think that everybody should have. And, you know, this would never happen in the U.S. I mean, you have to, in my jurisdiction, within 36 hours, you have to be brought before a judge, and they have to charge you within those 36 hours or release you. And sometimes you can get an extension for that. But this is way beyond that. And my understanding is that the French system is they do have this preventative detention. It's a little more restricted, but they've been in custody now 60 days, no charging. The investigation has been 10 months. So it would be a travesty if they've been held this long and there are no charges. It really would be. And it would really legitimize, I think, the prosecution, but I really think this is just wrong, and
the detention,
goes against everything that I understand.
To be clear, they've been detained since December the 29th. So, but they have the detention has been extended twice, so it's likely to go all the way up to February the 27th. What is inherently wrong in the criminal justice system about holding people for that long without charge?
Well, number one, you're taking somebody's liberty, and the U.S. Constitution is, I think, the hallmark of what I think your rights are and your natural human rights. If they're being held without any charges, it's very difficult for them to even mount their own investigation, and so I just think it goes really against any grain of human rights to hold them without this and they can do it for up to 180 days. They have to keep going in front of the judge. So there is a little bit of a check there, but it still is, to me, it's just plain wrong.
Sylvia, I think that you are supportive of preventative detention in this case. Why is that?
Actually, under the Romanian legislation, when we talk about what serious crimes, and human trafficking is among these serious crimes that are mentioned by the Romanian legislation, the preventive arrest is needed most of the time because there is a need of protection of victims mainly. When the criminal networks use different kind of violence, threats, or different other means to put pressure or to influence the testimonial of the victims, then the system, the constitutional and Romanian system takes these measures in order to offer a fair trial to the victims, actually.
Toby Cadman, obviously one of the reasons they're being held without charge is, as Sylvia mentioned, that allegedly they would be able to interfere, intimidate the witnesses and so on. Another reason put forward is that they are a flight risk. Now, their new lawyer, Tina Glandian, says that the investigation is 10 months old and they didn't flee in that time, and that there are alternative measures to make sure that they are, for example, under home arrest. The judge could confiscate all of their passports. If you were arguing in their favor for their release and, say, home detention or home arrest, how would you make that case?
Well, First of all, let me add the caveat as well. I'm absolutely no fan of either of them or any of the defendants, and I think they should quite rightly face prosecution for what we know or what we believe they are under investigation for. So just to put that out there first of all, but I think that the reason. The strong reasons that many people have for them to face prosecution reinforces the need that the process has to be fair. Now, in terms of being released on bail or provisional release, so risk of flight, interfering with evidence and interfering with witnesses, and the seriousness of the allegations and the potential prison sentence that they will ultimately receive if convicted are all matters that the judges would have to consider when an application for their provisional release is made. What you also have to take into account is that up until now, they did not believe that they would face prosecution. And so I think you have to measure the strength of their application for provisional release on the basis of what they face now and what the risks to them are now. And also when you look at many of the videos that he has made previously, there is a real risk, and the prosecution has set out that there is a real risk that they will interfere with the investigation. And so that is an important consideration. The fact that they just give up their passports, have a tag, and whatever other conditions are put forward is not going to satisfy any judge. And the same would apply if they've been arrested in the United Kingdom. And in a case like this, the likelihood of them being released on bail or provisional release is very, very minimal.
Bruce, Toby Cadman raises the issue of what the brothers have already said on video, on YouTube and elsewhere. And I know that you've created your own video about dealing with this and whether or not they've self-snitched, in your words. Now, their lawyer has told us that they, especially Andrew Tate, is merely playing a character and that this cannot be used as evidence against them. What's your view of that?
Oh, that's nonsense. It's his own words can be used against them as long as it's material and has something to do with, relevant in the case. It's called a statement of a party opponent. And in some of the videos that I've done, Mr. Tate lays out his scheme for defrauding these women and defrauding taxes. He's put so much out there, and he's done so many interviews and talked about how he hits women and how he does this and does that and how he's conned women into coming into his lair and then using them and then defrauding them out of at least 20% of their earnings. And then defrauding taxes on top of that. And so anything he says where he admits to crimes, which he does in quite a number of his videos, is fair game.
Sylvia, very important point that's been raised in the report that just before this is that 2 out of 6 of the alleged victims have publicly stated on Romanian television that the Tates are innocent and that they are not victims, and yet they've had their statements dismissed by the court on account of them being described as brainwashed. Why?
Actually, what we see often in this kind of procedure of lover boy recruiting, girls are not able to identify them as victims of human trafficking. And often they are so much in love with that person and they are not able to realize or to make declaration, testify against the person that actually infringes their rights or the trafficker.
But these 2 women are absolutely outraged that it comes down to a psychiatric evaluation and a judge to tell them if they are capable of stating whether or not they're victims. They're outraged by this.
often actually, as I mentioned, they are under the Stockholm syndrome, and they cannot identify themselves as victims of human trafficking. But there are some other victims that declared and mentioned exactly how they've been threatened, raped, misled. Somehow, a lot of pressure was on them to go from a loving relationship to a situation of becoming traffickers or recruiters for other victims. So somehow we have to have balance all of this information and their declaration.
Okay, let me bring in Toby Cadman now. He has something to add to this. Yeah, Toby.
Well, I mean, if you look at our legislation in England and Wales, so if Andrew Tate was arrested in the UK, he would almost certainly face charges under the Modern Slavery Act. And I've prosecuted a number of cases recently, extradition cases, one including Romania, that related to this. And if a person has consented to being held in slavery or servitude under the Modern Slavery Act, a person has been trafficked for that purpose. Even if that person consents, it is not a defense to a charge of trafficking or slavery. So quite often you will have victims of modern slavery who do not recognize, do not understand themselves, as Sylvia has just quite clearly pointed out, is that they don't have the appreciation for their victim status, and many people, whether we want to look at it as Stockholm Syndrome or some other theory, there is always that notion that a prosecutor will have to consider. So the fact that that person, that victim, doesn't accept that they were victimized is not necessarily a defense to the charge, and they can still face prosecution for that, and they do frequently. Certainly the cases in the UK under modern slavery, many of the victims do not consider themselves to be victims.
The Tates are claiming that DCOT are themselves corrupt and have a lot to answer for in Romania. And a little bit of research you will unearth a few unsavory things about the agency. For example, its former chief prosecutor, Alina Bicker, was jailed a few years ago for helping a businessman unfairly. And I guess the question is DCOT actually credible?
Well, there have been a number of, I would say, scandals within the agency. You've mentioned the former prosecutor who was prosecuted, and certainly in many of the Romanian extradition cases that I worked on for the prosecution, acting for the Romanian government, the defendants will always argue that it is a corrupt institution. But the British courts have consistently extradited individuals, notwithstanding those allegations. I think the fact that a prosecutor has been prosecuted for corruption and thrown in jail is more indicative of a system that functions according to the rule of law than one that doesn't. Of course, there is always going to be allegations of that kind, and there will be. There are problems with the Romanian criminal justice system. I'm not shying away from that, but I think the fact that a prosecutor was convicted 3 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to get a fair trial.
Fair enough. Bruce Rivers, we're coming towards the end of the programme. I've got to pose this to you. Tina Glandian, the new Tate lawyer, has tried to paint a picture of two young Americans who are being detained against their human rights in a corrupt Eastern European country, and that they ought to be given a lot of support to return home or to get out of there at least. And I think subliminally she's trying to draw perhaps a parallel to other American citizens. For example, Brittany Griner, who was locked up in Russia. She was actually convicted of an offence, and the US State Department and the President moved heaven and earth to help her. Why is it, do you think, that nobody has such sympathy for the Tate brothers?
Well, they're not sympathetic figures. I mean,
these guys are quite a few million people who follow them.
Well, I know, and these are all guys that eat Cheetos and live in their mother's basements, and I just cannot believe the following, and I get so much backlash from these guys when I just call out facts. And the Tate brothers have really done their level best to thumb their nose at the Romanian government and saying, I mean, he put out a video. Well, when I'm in jail, I'm gonna walk down and I'm gonna be like this and I'm gonna go like this and I'm gonna have my money out and I'll be eating out of my hand, and it was just ridiculous. And now they're putting out statements that he has nothing but the utmost respect for the Romanian government, and so he has a flagrant disregard for authority, for the law, and he's reaping his just deserts, I think.
Bruce Rivers, Toby Cadman, and Sylvia Tabuska, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode again or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.